Good afternoon, everybody. Amy Letke here with Integrity HR, presenting Staying Out of the Headlines, How to Create a Respectful Workplace. I am so glad that you all are here with me today and look forward to getting some feedback from you today on what you're doing with creating a respectful workplace. So today's session is going to be focused on really talking about respectful workplace programs and helping you to design a program that you might need in your organization or enhance the one that you already have. So we're going to spend the next 55 minutes or so together talking about staying out of the headlines, what you can do to create a respectful workplace. So let's first of all talk about our credit that we're going to have available for today's session. We are going to have HRCI and SHRM credits given at the end of the presentation, kind of, sort of. We got a little bit of something to tell you about that at the end of the presentation, so just stick around and hang in there. We can't email those out today, but we're going to tell you exactly how you can get your credits. So a couple housekeeping items. If you're having trouble hearing or you're having computer problems, just go to the chat box and make some notes in that chat box, and we'll do our best to give you some technical support. Same thing about questions. We may or may not be able to answer everything live on today's session, but if you've got some questions, we're happy to follow up with you by email or a phone call. So be sure to type those questions in chat, and for those of you who might be listening to this recorded, feel free to send us an email if you've got some questions about how to put your program together or questions about how to put Respectful Workplace into your organization. With that, let's take a look at the agenda. So today, the things we're going to cover is, what is respectful workplace training? What does that look like to your organization? Why should you provide that kind of training? What's the benefit to you as a leader? And maybe why do you need to sell that to upper management? I know one of the things we've heard time and time again is respectful workplace is such a big topic. How can we cover everything that we need to cover in the amount of time that we have within our business? So we're going to talk about some strategies on how to deal with that with your leadership. The next thing we're going to cover is ways to help you build respect in your workplace, and we've got some stats around that we think might be beneficial to help you designing the program for your organization that's really going to help you achieve the results that you want to see. The next piece to this is reducing risk. There's nothing that happens more often in the headlines, at least since the beginning of this year, I can remember, than sexual harassment issues, claims, diversity issues, EEO issues, and those kinds of things that have just always been in the media. I can't even think of a day that I've gotten in the car and heard the headlines about someone somewhere did something and now there's a big scandal. Well, we clearly don't want ourselves to be in the headlines over these types of topics, so we're going to address how you can reduce that risk. And then finally, we've got a sample training program for you to go ahead and implement. So it's almost done for you. We hope you can enjoy using it. And even if you don't use all of it, or perhaps you want to enhance it with some of your own materials, please do that. We want you to have a great program, and our goal is to be your resource to help you build programs that add value and effectiveness in your organization. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. When we think about respectful workplace training, what it is really starting with diversity. And I'm not a diversity consultant, so I'm going to give you a caveat right now. But when we think about respectful workplace, it really encompasses things about diversity and how we respect people who are different than us, the styles, the perspectives, those values and beliefs that really give us strength as an organization when we recognize that those differences really do bring value. And so diversity is something that can really add value to a respectful workplace training by educating our team members on what diversity is, how that impacts respectful workplace, and what are all the elements that kind of go into making our workplace great. And we can also talk about things that make us diverse. It's not just color, it's because our backgrounds are different. Our experiences are different. The people that we work with are different. And some of you who are on this call, I can take a look at the organizations that you're from. You're from very large organizations that have global operations with people who speak different languages, that look different, that wear different clothing, that have different religious beliefs. And because you're that global organization, those are some things that add value and strength. So when you think about designing and developing your Respectful Workplace program, one of the things you want to start with is, why do you want to do this? What is it that you're hoping to get out of your training? And how can you make that measurable and part of your organization? And we are going to cover that in just a moment. So let's talk more about what respectful workplace training should look like. And when you're thinking about designing your program, there are some very specific goals that you're going to want to take a look at. So first of all, we really want to understand respectful words and behaviors. One of the things that I think happens most frequently is people recognize what's wrong, right? What I mean is, people can recognize bad behavior sometimes more quickly than good behaviors. And so what we need to be thinking about is, how do we explain to employees and even new people or existing people what are respectful words and behaviors? So we want to really understand what those kinds of things look like and add that to our training. The next piece is to really understand that relationship between what respect is and organizational performance. One of the things that we know, and some of the great organizational support systems and even metrics that have been developed over the years by Gallup, has provided us with specific information that organizations that have respectful workplace programs and truly implement them do achieve higher levels of performance. There's a lot of data to support that culture and building one with respect and diversity can truly help make your organization a higher performing company. So keep that in the back of your mind as you're developing your programs, that it's not just about doing what's right for employees and doing what's right for your business. It's taking care of your future, which takes care of your bottom line. So there's some resources out there. If you do a quick Google search, you'll find those, and there are some pretty impressive stats. And then the final thing that we have on the goal slide here is to look at activities and behaviors that promote and sustain respect. And we're going to get into that here in a minute with our presentation. Some additional objectives you might consider with your respectful workplace training would be telling people and sharing with them what respect at work looks like. And again, this is providing very specific examples of what respect is and what it isn't. So for example, when you're designing your program, you might say, if someone is in line in the cafeteria and someone else is in a hurry, they just arbitrarily cut line, move in, take some food that someone else had already had in the refrigerator with their name on it, and runs out the door, that's probably some pretty inappropriate and disrespectful training. Depending on your culture, that would be something that's kind of fairly annoying, but it's not going to disrupt the world unless it happens all the time and everybody's taking everybody's food, and then next thing you know, the HR manager has a bunch of very angry people in their office, right? So if that's happening in your organization, you can pretty easily address what that behavior is and determine how to fix that. And probably taking it to your employees and talking to them is a great place to start. But sometimes people don't even realize that what they do is disrespectful. And if you think about my refrigerator example, you can think about maybe how people at home just think, okay, I'm going to go grab that sandwich that's in my refrigerator at home and nobody's going to care about it. Well, if it wasn't a problem someplace else, they might not really understand that it's a problem in your business. So because we are all different employers, we have different rules, different expectations around respect. So think about what that really does look like and give some concrete examples in your programs. Also defining what's okay and what's not okay with harassment and discrimination. I'm not going to spend too much time on that here at this point, but it is something that you do want to add in your presentation because people sometimes think harassment is unacceptable and that somebody else needs to deal with it when it's really their own issue. We're going to talk about how to handle that in just a little bit. And then the next piece that you might consider as an objective is to understand and describe how unlawful harassment and discrimination really negatively affects the workplace. So it's not just about coming down hard on some employee because they don't know better. It's really about educating and helping people be more respectful. So we're going to cover that here in just a minute. Next on our agenda is to really take a look at why we should be providing training. And, you know, that's always an age-old question. Why do we do training on anything? And the reality is if we don't train our people on what we expect, then we're not getting anything that we would necessarily want. So we've got to train people up for what it is we want them to do. And that's why we provide training, whether it's developmental training, culture training, expectation training, is to help train people up to what the expectations are in the organization. So we really do want to create some self-awareness, and this is one of those things that we know right now. Emotional intelligence is kind of one of those hot buttons in the HR world, and clearly a hot button when we look at hiring employees is, do people really understand what other people see? And do they recognize the things that maybe are blind spots for them? So increasing self-awareness with respectful workplace training is one of the key objectives that can really get you some true benefits in your business. We also want to get rid of some stereotypes, and some organizations may be more challenged with that than others. You might have people who are not so diverse, and then you bring a different person into your organization and it creates some chaos. So we want to clearly address and remove stereotypes as best we can, and training is a really good way to let people know that, hey, these kinds of things aren't okay. We also obviously want to make the environment better so people feel more comfortable with where they're working and keep that unlawful stuff from happening. So again, that's a good reason, 4 steps here to provide training. Now, let's go into this self-awareness piece a little bit more, because being self-aware is important for anybody's success, and clearly in my many years of being an HR leader, it's very enlightening to kind of take a look back on those years when you first start in your career to where you are after 10, 20, or 30 years. But being self-aware really helps people understand their view of the world, and that sometimes the way they see things may not be reality, and it may not be what's okay in your business. And you know, I like to use that lens factor, and you'll see this in the sample presentation that we're going to share with you in just a little bit, that we liken diversity and our self-awareness to kind of the lens that we have, and that what we look at might be very different from others. You know, how you see things might be how you were raised, what your environment was. Did you have a 2-parent home, a single-parent home? Were you raised by other family members or friends? How you grew up and your experiences that you have really do reflect how you view the world. So how people's lens around what's okay and what's acceptable behavior is going to vary greatly based upon their own experiences. So when you craft your training, thinking about how you can take the experiences that people have, apply them to work so that they can be used for the greater good of the organization and your objectives. But talking to people about how they see things, and that, you know, just because you grew up one way and learn things a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong or bad. It's just different. And differences can truly help us have more high-performing organizations. Next, we want to take a look at stereotypes and why this is important to a respectful workplace program. And, you know, sometimes we don't even think about this. Employees sometimes just find it natural to make quick judgments about people. We do that in interviewing. You know, it's natural. It's human behavior to make a quick judgment call about whether you like someone or don't. And it's very difficult after the first few seconds, it's usually less than a minute, that people already form a judgment. And that's pretty interesting, isn't it? People will form a judgment about you or about their coworkers in less than a minute. So this first question on the slide is something that I'd really encourage you to throw out there to your employees in your training program, that why do we make those judgments very quickly when we really don't have information? And the reality around that is that it's natural and it's human. And so we've got to control that a little bit, because we know that when we take our time to react differently and we give people chances, we get a lot of benefit from that. But the second question on this slide gets into how do you really ensure that those stereotypes don't interfere with your ability to treat everybody with high regard. And I can think back to some training programs that I have done throughout the course of my career where I ask the questions about stereotypes. And depending on people's backgrounds, they see that very differently, whether someone who is much different from them would come into the workplace and what they may say or may do, which would be either appropriate or not. I can think about a time when I was living in Iowa. I love that state. It's a beautiful state, big hunting state. And if you don't know, you haven't been there, there's a season for pheasant hunting, and it's very, very popular. And I remember we were doing some training at a manufacturing facility, and someone was hired, and they weren't a hunter. And it was getting close to plant shutdown, and no one could really understand why this person didn't want to hunt when everybody else was ready to take off with their friends and coworkers and go out hunting some pheasant. And what turned into something as just a I don't hunt situation turned into some name-calling and shouting and arguments in the parking lot, and next thing you know, there was all-out fighting that took place. Crazy things happen from very small differences. So training was very important in that situation, awareness, and because someone's background and interests are different, sometimes we really have to hone in on what that is so we can be responsive to addressing that within our own cultures. Okay. Next on the docket here is to address unlawful harassment and discrimination. You know, something in your training that you really want to talk about is understanding the forms of conduct that really derail respect. If you've got some history in your business, you can probably write down some very specific things that have happened that constitute inappropriate conduct. Let's talk about those easy ones. The easy ones would be inappropriate touching, right? And I'm not going to get into a lot of the basics around sexual and unlawful harassment because I'm assuming that a lot of you on this call know a lot about that already. But I am going to touch on some forms of this. So when you're having your training, it's important to talk to people about appropriate language. For example, if it's not okay to drop F-bombs at your work, you should tell people that. Because if they don't know that, they may come in and say, I'm going to do it anyway. If it's not okay for people to touch each other, which it should not be, right? We want to prevent that. We need to explain that, hey, don't touch people. Even if it's kind of an attaboy or attagirl pat on the behind, that's probably a major danger zone. We don't want to do that in our workplace, right? There's probably 8 or 10 things that you might want to go through. It's no different than your employee handbook. But again, your employee handbook probably only gets read once or twice unless people are going to take a look at when they're going to get their next vacation upgrade, right? So your training is really important to talk about conduct that's going to be derailing for them from the standpoint of respectfulness and even what people should or should not say to other people. Talking about what's problematic and unlawful is also key. I find that sometimes people find that teasing might go into the harassment category. So, I mean, where we are in Louisville, Kentucky. Big rivalry with University of Louisville and University of Kentucky. Just because someone wants to throw some this and that or smack talk about University of Louisville or University of Kentucky doesn't necessarily constitute harassing people. It is not unlawful, even though some people might think so. So, what I'm talking about is educating your workplace that if it has something to do with race, religion, sex, national origin, creed, let's say disability, high veteran status, things like that are really protected by law. Those are the things that we're talking about that we want to give some good examples around. What are unlawful harassment incidents? And from my vantage point, I would come back and say, okay, if someone's making fun of someone because they're in a wheelchair at work, that's an unlawful harassment most likely, right? Could be. Now, without more information, it would be a quick judgment call. But from the standpoint of somebody doing that, that's clearly not being nice, but it's also borderline illegal, most likely. Same thing with religion. We're making religious jokes at work, or pictures that are inappropriate or sexually motivated, or things that are completely unacceptable, with respect to national origin types of issues, where someone came from. Those are kinds of examples where you need to get into the details so that people understand, oh, I hadn't even thought about that. If I made a joke about someone coming here from Turkey, and then I associated that with my Thanksgiving dinner, that would probably not be okay. So again, sometimes things that seem very obvious to those of us who've been in the working world and the workplace and even worked for large companies that have good, solid training programs may not be so obvious to others. We need to spell it out to everyone. So let's talk about 5 ways to help you build respect in your workplace. And I'm going to just take them from 1 to 5. So here's the slide of the top 5 things that you can do to build respect in your workplace. Let's take a look at the first item here. The first one is just don't give in to myths. Sometimes people say when it comes to building a respectful workplace program that it's just too hard and, we really don't need that. Everybody knows what to behave. We got so much work to do. We are not going to take the time for that. This is your opportunity to really address biases that might cause legal problems and also increase turnover in your workplace. Both of those are huge and problematic. We want to bring people into our companies that add value, can stay, that build friendships and relationships. This is one of those programs that can truly help you reinforce your culture. And it doesn't take a lot of time. You may not want to cover too much, but if you can take an hour or so and train your workplace on what is respectful and using some of the slides we're going to give you here in just a few minutes, you're going to really be able to see some positive results. And you've got everybody on the same page, which is most important. And if you don't do that, then you run the risk of people thinking certain things are okay and other things are not. So it's really important to push back on your senior leadership when you get any kind of pushback around timing. We don't need it. Clearly the risk factor of not doing it is pretty high at this point in time. And with this media, social media, everything that we see and hear right now outside of work talking about problems with respect, sexual harassment, inappropriate behaviors, now is the time for us as employers to really take a position around how our core values should be played out within our business. The next myth is that bias reduction training may or may not be helpful. Well, we need to conduct some bias reduction training, and that is because our hiring teams may or may not know that there are certain things that are protected. When's the last time you trained those who are doing recruiting, your teammates, those leaders, people who are helping to interview people to come into your workplace? Have you trained them on how to hire great people, on how to look for diversity, on questions to ask so that people don't ask the things that they shouldn't ask? We want to stick to job descriptions, stick to content, and that different can be really good. A lot of times people use assessments at work like the DISC profile to help people see that a D works one way and the I works another and the S works a very different way and the C is also another way. So how can you take those behavior styles and make the most out of them? Because if you had all one style, it would probably not be as effective as if we brought everybody's style together and we made the most of that. So looking for cultural competence in helping to increase that with our senior leadership can really help reduce bias. And if we don't conduct training, we're not going to help build awareness. So if you need some data around that, let me know, because I've got a lot of information that might be helpful to you if you're running into struggles with that. The third myth is that, oh, we should avoid any input and listen to our employees. Oh, yes, let's all at the senior level be know-it-alls, because why would we need that? Well, it's really interesting. Sometimes people get going at a very fast pace, and one thing that we think can really be beneficial is if we ask our employees how to make changes. So let's say you know you've got some problems in your workplace. Maybe you've got a lot of foul language going on, and it's offensive to some people. Why not run that past your employees? Are much more likely to embrace those recommendations, right? So if we're more likely to be part of a solution to a problem, then we're more likely to accept how that change is going to impact our world. Think about how that affects you when you are involved in helping provide input for change. You know, sometimes we just have to listen to people and respond very favorably, even if we don't agree to what's going on. And I think that that's very important, that sometimes we just need to listen, accept the information, and then we move forward. And sometimes we can make it work, sometimes we don't, but involving people can really be beneficial when you know you have an issue in your workplace. The fourth area that's a myth is that we should not have any leaders involved in any of this stuff. Well, the reality is, you betcha, we need to make sure our leaders are involved, and we've got some internal champions. If HR is the only part of the organization that embraces respectful workplace, we're going to have problems. I know it was really funny. One time I went to a meeting not too long ago with a firm that we do a lot of business with. And I walked into the room, and it got very quiet, and someone leaned over, and they said, uh-oh, don't say that. Here comes the HR lady. And I laughed that off and thought, well, isn't that funny, because I like a good joke just as much as anybody else. But I thought for a second, you know what, shame on me, because if they associate some of these things with me because I'm HR, then they're not owning some of this situation. So I had to really think about that, and I went back to the owner of the company and really talked with them about processing that and who owned what HR programs were, because if they were HR programs, they really weren't going to be part of the organization. They needed to be things that really reflected how their business operated, and that all the leaders needed to buy into these programs. It wasn't just an HR program. So I'm going to throw that out there for each of you on this call today. Do you have internal champions who can really foster your cultural beliefs, the way you treat people, the respect that we need to have within the organization? And we need to recruit leaders at the highest level in each area of the organization who are going to embrace the policies, the practices, those things that really are special and make your business unique. I want to reflect for a minute on a book that I've reread actually recently. It's called Top Grading by Thomas Smart. And it's a book about how to hire people, and it's probably one of the most extensive recruiting processes that I have experienced in my entire career, and that's a long time, folks. But I did a special review of this book, and I thought about what he said, the author said about hiring. And his comment in his book is that if you have C players in your organization hiring for your organization, what are your results going to be? Well, more than likely, they're not hiring A players, because those people are going to run circles around them. So what happens if you have B players hiring for your organization? Well, most likely they're hiring B players at best, because they're going to be hiring people who are a lot like them. That's what we naturally do. We look for people who are a lot like us in terms of how we think and how we perform business, but maybe we don't always hire the highest performers. So when you're doing your hiring, you want to have your A players involved in that. So training your A players on what to look for, how to hire, what to do, those are people that are going to help recruit great leaders with high standards in each level of your organization. So take a moment to kind of think about that. What are you doing to bring in people who support diversity, respectfulness, sexual harassment prevention, discrimination prevention, those kinds of attitudes towards your culture? If you haven't put your process in place, I want you to think about that, because it's really a great opportunity for you to really review your processes and practices for how you're getting leaders to embrace the things that are great practices for your business overall. All right, number 5 here on our myth list, our mythbuster list, is that we should not develop and mentor people. Yeah, that is definitely a myth. So think about a mentoring program. I talk about this frequently with my team as well as clients, that developing a mentoring program is important. Sometimes it's hard to put something like that into place, but when people have others they can go to, it can really make a difference. Some organizations, it's like a buddy system. Maybe you hire new people and you assign a buddy to them to help them get oriented into the organization. They learn about the organization. They have a friend kind of built in at work. It's a great way to get somebody started. Even if you don't have a formal mentoring program, you can encourage employees to find mentors. It's not easy, but you know, people who do consistently seek out mentors, whether it's voluntary or paid mentors, they tend to have much better means for promotion and navigation within organizations. So think about your mentoring program, whether it's formal or informal, or if it's something that you want people to look externally. And maybe it's something that you want to have it for high performers or people who can apply. But mentoring people who can share your culture, your values, and embrace this respectful workplace concept is only going to help build your organization and strengthen your culture. Next, let's take a moment and look at how we can reduce risk in our organization. You know, managing risk is tricky, and I think what we hear on the news every day about sexual harassment, prevention, discrimination, big companies getting these big fines for doing not so great things, those are things we don't want to see. Clearly, I don't want to be in the media about this topic, and I'm sure most of you on this call don't either. And we want to protect our leaders. If we're not the ones at the top in the business, we also want to protect them so that they don't unknowingly get themselves into trouble. So how do we manage our risk? Well, documenting policies, educating our workforce, and mitigating risk are the 3 key areas that we can take this and really make a difference. So let's take a quick look at what those things are. First of all, we've got our handbook, and employee handbooks are absolutely critical. It's funny because I talk to a lot of organizations. We develop a lot of handbooks for organizations, and it's so hard to get people to read those things. So I'm going to tell you right now, folks, don't make a big employee handbook when people won't use it, and don't make a big employee handbook if you've got policies in there that are not current, accurate, or enforced, okay? Whew, hope you got all that. Probably time to throw one out the window, right? Restart. Okay. Well, employee handbooks should have a policy that's clear around your respectful workplace program. If you've just got sexual and other unlawful harassment as a policy in your handbook, which a lot of people do, you might want to think about adding something around respectful workplace, how you want people to treat each other, what your culture represents, and things like that that helps you build your organization. You clearly want to have the sexual and unlawful harassment policy in that handbook, and when you do your training, you're going to want to have that available for people to review. So one key thing that sometimes I see missing in these kinds of policies is what are our procedures when someone reports an incident. If someone feels that they've been sexually harassed, who do they go to? What happens? And how do we deal with that? What's our reporting process? If you don't have specific people designated, and I'd encourage you to have a couple people for that, look at that, because that's an opportunity for you to strengthen your program. The other piece of this is you probably want to document how you want people to behave. If a coworker is exchanging an inappropriate joke with another coworker and it's a one-off event, do you necessarily want people to report that? I challenge you on that. Some of my colleagues would say absolutely, report everything. My concern is I don't think HR has got enough time in the day to deal with every little disagreement that happens between employees. We need to be involved in helping resolve the big issues that are really critical. So how do we know about that? Well, we might want to encourage employees to address it with each other first. And let me tell you why that's important. Because many times I've had someone report something and say that they felt sexually harassed. Maybe the situation was a former boyfriend or girlfriend, and somebody makes a comment and they break up, and now it becomes an HR issue. So once we know about it in HR, we have to do something about it, right? We need to follow our process and our procedure, and especially if there's some inkling of something inappropriate, we better make sure we get through that and investigate it fully. There have been numbers of times when I've gotten involved in a sexual harassment incident and somebody just got mad. And next thing you know, everybody made up and they said, oh, no, it's okay now. It really wasn't that bad. And it really can cause a lot of problems with friendships. And even when people say things inappropriate, if they get a chance to face that perpetrator and address it with them, there's something to be said for having the strength to do that. But of course, you always want to have a clear line for someone to go to report something when they don't feel that they can actually confront the perpetrator. And if they can't give someone that opportunity to say, hey, just stop it. Hey, don't call me that name ever again. Hey, don't touch me. Hey, don't say that. You know, if they can't do that, they do need a venue to be able to address it. But always give employees and train them the opportunity to have the courage to say something to someone, because it just might give that other person the opportunity to realize, holy smokes, I was headed down a path that I shouldn't have been going on. So think about that. If you need help with procedures and investigations, get those. You need to have those well documented, how it's going to work. You need to have professionals who know what they're doing with investigations. You can get training for that, and it's good to do that. And you may or may not want it to be HR. If you're in a big company, you want to train key managers to be able to identify, understand potential risks and problems, and be able to help mitigate things. Of course, when it's really difficult, you want to be able to escalate those quickly so you can get them resolved. If you need external resources like consultants and other people to help you with that, get them. It's money well spent that will keep you out of the courtroom. If you don't, then make sure you've got good training, and you might want to keep your fingers crossed. Okay, but train your leaders and train your employees. It's really important that leaders understand they're held to a higher standard. They can be sued personally, just like your business, just like your CEO. Anybody can sue anybody for any reason virtually in this country. And so we want to protect our leaders, because when it comes to sexual and other unlawful harassment, they can be held and are held to a higher standard than regular employees. Now, your employees also need to understand there's certain rules around things, and we're not going to allow any kind of illegitimate reporting of sexual or other unlawful harassment, and there will be severe consequences for people who report things that are not true. So we need to make sure that people understand that they need to be ethical with reporting things, and that there will be a quick, responsive team that is able to help resolve their issues quickly. All right. Now, one of my colleagues here within our organization is Dwayne Ray. He's not able to be with us today because he's on vacation in Jamaica. Oh my gosh, we all wish we were there, right? Actually, I think Dwayne's going to have his own fun, and I'm really happy he's away. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some things relative to risk management that Dwayne can definitely dive into much more deeply. And if you'd like to talk with him more about that, I definitely invite you to do that. But I'm going to try my best here to talk about risk management and insurance and how this can help you reduce your risk. Clearly, we want to start with documenting your policies and doing those things on the previous slide, but we can also take a look at helping mitigate risk with an insurance product. It's called employment practice liability insurance. This has been around for maybe 15 or 20 years, and it used to be very, very expensive insurance. The reason it came about is because employee lawsuits have risen significantly, and as you're taking a look at this slide, they've risen 400%, and wrongful termination suits jumping up to more than 260. So it's really crazy that we're more likely to be sued by an employee than have a fire at our facility. Isn't that something? I had no idea. And it's not just big companies that are being hit. You know, we can open up the newspaper any day and see big names in the paper around wrongful termination issues. But a lot of times these are brought against very small companies with less than 100 employees. When I think about the financial cost with lawsuits, and if you have been around for any time in business, it's going to hit your company. And you want to be able to reduce the amount of money that's going to be in a cash outlay in the event there is some kind of a court cost or legal fee. You know, anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 is going to be an average out-of-pocket expense to settle a situation. And even if it's dismissed, it's going to be $10,000 or $20,000. And if it goes to trial, you're spending over six figures. It's going to be very costly to the organization. So it's really time to look at this kind of coverage because it can add tremendous benefit to keeping the risk of costly lawsuits away from your organization. One other quick slide about what kind of claims are taking place that this kind of coverage can help you manage. The first one is retaliation claims. And this is really interesting that, you know, of all the EEOC charges that have taken place, this is from 2015, I think that's the most recent data we were able to get, retaliation was the top charge. And that's generally a situation, an example of that might be where someone claims of sexual harassment within the organization, and maybe they're a poor performer. Then they claim sexual harassment, there's an investigation, maybe something's found or not found, but then next thing that happens is that person who reported it is terminated for some kind of performance issue. Well, they may come back and say, hey, you retaliated against me because I put a claim in for sexual harassment and you just fired me because of that. Well, this is where employment practice liability can help you because these are those EEOC areas that we get investigations, and next thing we get lawsuits, and next thing we're spending a lot of time dealing with those issues instead of focusing on our business. So if you take a look at this list, it's really interesting to take a look at those EEOC claims. Finally, if we take a look at employment practice liability insurance, what's covered if you have a policy, and these are really just really good doing business kinds of policies. But this next slide really addresses things where you've got discrimination issues, wrongful termination, negligent evaluation, sexual harassment, pretty much anything that an employee is going to come back and sue your company for is going to be covered for this particular policy. And what's good about some of these policies is that it can also be purchased by itself, or you can also cover your executives. And not that any of you out there have ever had a bad behaving executive. I'm not going to say any more about that. But if you've ever worked with anyone who might be a little risky in what they might say or do, this is the stuff you need to be looking into. It could be errors, misstatements, neglect. You know, you might even be able to include some of your board members. But clearly, it can cover legal defense in the event you do have a claim. So you might be asking, how much does this stuff cost? Well, it used to be big bucks. And I remember when I was in software, VP of a software company years ago, it was just not affordable. We had 2,000 employees in the United States and Canada, and EPLI insurance, when it first came out, was just not affordable. Today, a small company can buy it for a few $1,000s, and it can go up from there, depending on what you're looking at. But there's a lot of free resources that come with these kinds of products, and my colleague Dwayne would be able to share more with you. But a lot of times it's a free, active resource like an attorney who you could call and ask questions about a specific claim. Or maybe there's training programs that they have for leadership and other members of management to help you mitigate risk associated with this. But I know employment practice liability insurance, it's part of the property and casualty side of insurance. I know from my experience in HR, That was not my responsibility. Workers' compensation, property casualty insurance, business insurance, that all kind of went to some of my colleagues in finance and administration. So I didn't actively get involved in selecting and recommending those products. But today, folks, this is where you can partner with those folks and really look at your insurance coverage. And for what you're spending in your overall business insurance, this is one of those areas that can significantly reduce your risk. So you're going to save money because you're not going to be spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars when you have a lawsuit. All right, employment practices liability insurance. If you don't have it, you need it. Let's move on and talk about training. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I'm going to go woo-hoo, zippity-doo-dah through what we've got here next. So let's take a look at how we do training for the organization. And, okay, don't tell 3M I stole this from them, but it was on the website, so I just said, hey, that's pretty awesome. Actually, I applaud 3M for what they prepared here because I thought what they did was awesome. They put it out there what their commitment is, and this came right from their CEO. If you don't have a commitment statement, it's really a huge opportunity to get that from your executives so that you can say, this is what we are here to do. With 3M, this is a place where everybody can do his or her best and where people are free to report workplace concerns without fear, retaliation, or reprisal. It's awesome. It's a great way to kind of start and lead off your training. So here's how to set your training program up, and I'm going to give you the slides that you can add to your presentation. So right now we're going to start with your training program within your organization. All right, so the first slide here is on hosting your respectful workplace training. Usually you want to do it at least once a year. You want to have kind of a special segment for your managers because they need to understand what to do if somebody reports anything inappropriate to them. And if anybody knows, has some experience with this, if someone goes to a manager and says, I think I've been sexually harassed and this is what happened and I need your help, but I really don't want you to investigate, I just need some advice. You got to make sure your managers know that's not okay. They have to take action. It's absolutely imperative that they do something because if they don't, that's a ding on the company, a ding on them, and it could result in not only continued problems of sexual harassment in the workplace, but the fact that if we don't do something about it is just as bad as if we do something wrong about it or nothing at all. Okay, so we're going to have a 1-hour training program, and it's going to look something like this. Here we go. Welcome to Respectful Workplace Training. Insert your name, your details, and your contact there. Boom, done for you. Then we're going to put our goals for today's training, and so you want to make sure that you're going to say, hey, here's our goals. Now, let me tell you something, folks. This is where you can customize to meet the needs of your business. If you know that, hey, we've got a pretty good diversity plan, it's all working out okay, I just need to cover respectful workplace, including sexual and other unlawful harassment, maybe some bullying, blah, blah, blah. Put that in here for your goals. What's your company's position, your policy, and next steps. So we're going to cover those kinds of things. The next slide, hey, guess what? You saw this earlier, right? We're talking about diversity. And you can add that slide, including some of the things that make us diverse. Add your own stuff here, folks. That's the idea. And then the next slide that you might have in your training program would be talking about self-awareness and how this helps us to become a better employee and a higher contributor. Taking a look at the next slide, we're getting into that. Remember I had that stereotype conversation with you all earlier? That's right. Here it's for you. You can add this into your presentation. Ask your employees what these things do. What does this cause within your organization? And when you think about stereotypes and imperatives, what do you have? Well, we know we have some stereotypes within our organization. I know within mine we have a stereotype that cheetah print is a required element in the wardrobe. I know that sounds a little crazy, but cheetah print is everywhere in our organization. It's not required, but it's certainly a lot of fun sometimes when we wear it. And that's just clearly in jest. But seriously, what stereotypes exist in your organization that bother people, and how do we fix them? The next slide here is defining harassment, okay? And again, sometimes it's about what's not harassment as well as what is. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the presentation, that some things are just not illegal harassment. And some things just might be guys get along, gals get along, and, stop bickering. But then, there's things that really do need to get addressed. So we've got the Oxford Dictionary definition right here for you. And, it's really not illegal unless it's these key things. So again, talking about that with your team is important. The next slide we've got is, respect in the workplace. And again, if you're going to be talking about respect, let's kind of get into those deep dives of what is a respectful word and behavior. Again, give people some clear examples about what this stuff looks like within your organization. And not everybody is going to be the same. The issues that you may have may not be the same as someone else on this call today. But identifying and knowing what's going on in your business is important. By the way, I'm just going to add a quick sidebar in here. If you haven't done an employee survey within your business in a while, I do encourage you to do one of those at least once a year. They're really great news and give you information to help build a great respectful workplace program. If you need some help with that or have some questions, let me know. Next slide that should go in your presentation is, what do we do when things go wrong and what's bad in our organization? I want to tell people about that. Same thing with the words that we use. Some things are not okay. Again, you might want to add some of those words that are in here, as long as they're not too bad, that really derail workplace positivity. The next piece is getting into what's a hostile work environment. I've got some things in here about sexual and other unlawful harassment that come up in just a minute. But you do want to talk about hostile work environment. People are hearing that on the news, and so you may as well address that now because you want people to know that not everything creates a hostile work environment. If it's a perceived problem, it's very real when it's perceived by the victim, it occurs at work, and maybe there's a lot of people who are affected in the environment. So you might want to talk about it and the elements that have to go into that. So a couple of other things with respect to this topic for our presentation is we might want to throw something in about discrimination and recognizing that we do discriminate because we make choices. But we're talking about illegal and unlawful discrimination, and that becomes a problem at work when these things happen that are on this slide. When we look at harassment, we're going to look at quid pro quo, and that's the, you do something for me, I'm going to give you a promotion. You do that, I'm going to give you money. You do this, I'm going to make sure you have access to a company car. Those are the kinds of things that where people have an advantage and expect something in return. So again, that's unlawful sexual harassment. We might also talk about, we did talk about hostile work environment before, but if you want to move the slides around, you can do that and put that here. The other piece that we didn't get into earlier is workplace bullying, but I do think that this is something that you might want to add as part of your presentation on respectful workplace, because clearly if you've got bullying going on, we got some problems with respect. And then finally, one thing you might want to add to your presentation is behaviors. The red here on the behavior line is absolutely stuff you cannot do. Can't do it. And I would say, it's probably foul language, touching, stuff that's really intentional harassment, don't. Then the yellow is the stuff that's going to get you into trouble. And then the green, of course, it's pretty small, things that you really shouldn't do, right? That yellow is pretty wide. So adding that can really give people an understanding that there's just things you just have a no-go zone on. The next piece of this is having a company policy and statement, and then expected behaviors. Now, one thing you might want to have within the summary is what you plan to do, what you did in your training, what you covered, and what your expectations are from your people. And then finally, make sure that you've got your attendance, create an acknowledgement form, because let me tell you what, if you've got a problem, you want to make sure everyone signs an acknowledgement that says, I understand this training, I agree to behave the way I'm asked to behave based upon these policies, and I realize there's consequences if I don't. So create that acknowledgement and then talk about next steps. Once you're finished with training, you definitely want to evaluate your risk factors for your organization. Have you had claims? Do you need to train other people? Do you need to coach some people who maybe didn't get it at training? Yep, you need to identify that, folks. And then have you mitigated your risk through having some insurance, and that's really an easy choice that you should look for. Finally, that's kind of it for the training program, but if you need help with creating additional training or you want somebody to come in and facilitate it for you, let us know. Same thing with your insurance evaluation. If you'd like some help with taking a look at what you have or what you don't have, we've got experts here. We just need a couple of pieces of data, and we can give you an idea of what it's going to take to help you have that covered. And the next piece here is we can give you our presentation. And if you'd like a copy of this, we can email it to you. But a couple things we're going to ask is that right now you take a minute and you put a note in our chat box that says, what did you take away from today's presentation? What was one key learning objective that you took away from today that really is going to help you in building your program? So if you want a copy of this presentation, guess what? We're going to give it to you, but you got to tell us about what your key takeaway was from today's presentation and what is one business issue that you have that keeps you up at night. We just really want to know. We want to learn from those of you who are out there who are part of our presentation. What are the things that keep you up at night? We definitely want to know that so that we can create programs and things that help add value to your business. Remember, we're here to help you. And that's why we put this presentation today. We made it quick for an hour, and we're here, and we are so grateful that so many of you chose to sign on to today's webinar. And we clearly hope that you'll be with us again for our future sessions that are coming up in the next couple months. And if you're in the Louisville, Kentucky area, we'd love to have you come visit us. In the meantime, if you do need help with handbooks or HR, training like we've talked about, or other areas of HR, we hope that you'll turn to Integrity HR so that we can be your partner. Now, drum roll please, everybody who wants credit for participating in today's session.